Warning. This video contains spoilers for the entirety of Arcane right from the get-go. If you haven't watched Arcane and you want to, then I suggest you click off now. And before we start, because I'm not going to get to do this later, I would like to thank my YouTube members for the continued support. So Arcane just finished its second and quote-unquote final season, and I'm feeling quite a few different things. Confused, sad, disorientated, agitated, shocked, amazed, empty. This season of television has made me feel many things, but there is one thing that I don't feel, and that is satisfied. It feels almost selfish to say that after getting to experience one of the best possible origin stories for my favourite fictional character of all time, shown to us with some of the most beautiful animation ever put to screen, getting to spend time in a world that is so deep with fantastic lore and three-dimensional characters. But unfortunately for me, Arcane Season 2, it just couldn't stick the landing. That isn't to say that I hated it. Very far from it. In my mind, all of the major complications that this season of television suffered from can be traced back to one big problem: pacing. 9 episodes just wasn't enough to wrap up a story that scope was still expanding by the 7th episode. I've been hesitating to put this video out. I mean, by the time it comes out, it may feel like a quick turnaround since the end of the show, but I don't think I've ever felt so conflicted on what I'm about to say. Because while this is the end of Arcane, this definitely isn't the end of the League of Legends television universe or whatever's going on there. And maybe, probably not the definitive ending to a few of the characters unless the entirety of the League of Legends lore is going to be rewritten again. I'll save my major theories for why that is later, but because with the exception of 3 specific characters, I didn't mind Arcane Season 2's ending. It's kind of just how we got to that point. I know it's a video essay cliche to say, to find out how we got here, we need to go back to the beginning, and I promise I won't waste your time too long talking about this. I consider the first season of Arcane to be a borderline masterpiece. Am I putting this too high on a pedestal? Maybe. But the first season of Arcane was also a pretty fast-paced TV show. But one of the strengths of this show is the ability to trim a lot of the fat and let people interpret for themselves what happened between point A and point B that you may not have seen. Silco and Vander's storyline in the first act of Season 1, for example, there is one scene that gives a hint to what may have happened between the two, but you have all the context you need for the story to work in the moment. It was also kind of strange that this aspect of their relationship was explored more after they both die. This also happens with, Viktor's assistant in the first season, Skye, I think her name was. She isn't developed much as a character. I think she spends most of the first season giving googly eyes to Viktor. But the way Viktor deals with her death is a great indicator of how close they were. Also, Skye gets more lines and screen time after she dies in the second season. But that probably isn't actually her. It could be, but it could also be a manifestation of his humanity. It's weird. The point I'm making is that the first season of Arcane is pretty fast-paced, but it is also extremely precise in what they show and what they leave to the viewer to piece together in their heads. That being said, I do think that maybe Vi and Caitlyn's relationship and their trust in each other moves a bit too fast in the second act, and the choice to introduce Bessa in the 8th episode as well as the faction of Noxus to the story feels way too late to care about, considering how many of the other stories were kind of just reaching their conclusion and their peak at that time. But I also get that Bessa is mostly being set up as the main antagonist for the second season. And these are very, very minor complaints, considering that the rest of Season 1 is just absolutely phenomenal. So Act 1 of Season 2 of Arcane feels strange, and it's because it doesn't feel like the start of a new season, and more of a conclusion to the first. With the exception of Jinx and Silco, the end of Act 1 of Season 2 feels like a more definitive season end for a lot of character arc than the first season was. The story takes place almost immediately after the end of the last season and concludes a lot of the hanging plot threads left in its aftermath. But this is also where the show starts to get a bit sloppy. I mean, firstly, Jayce and Viktor. These characters share one scene together, and it's the one where they have a falling out. And it happens so fast. It feels like it happens in under a minute. Speaking of happening fast, we also get introduced to the Black Rose, and a character I was never expecting to see in this show. Not that they ever mention LeBlanc by name or even show her real face, or her in-game face, because it's not really her real face. LeBlanc's lore is really weird. This almost comes out of nowhere, but it is so much more crazy that we are being introduced to yet another new faction on top of introducing the situation with the Cambarans after Silco's death, Caitlyn's new Enforcer Expendable squad, Viktor and Jayce's falling out, Vi and Caitlyn's romance. the teasers of Singed creating Warwick, Jinx dealing with what she did, and Jayce and Ekko and Heimerdinger all trying to figure out what's going on with the anomaly. There are a lot of plot points to juggle, and Act 1 does it okay. I wish we had spent more time with Caitlyn and the Enforcer squad, seeing as these characters are somewhat plot relevant, though I'd be surprised if you knew any of their names other than Maddie. We will get to her. Look, in an episode to develop each of their characters and camaraderie would have gone a long way, considering that they stick around for the rest of the season. This isn't just Act 1's problem, it is a whole season problem. It's just that most of their mission to the Underground was shown to us in montage form. But I will say that Caitlyn and Vi's romance or relationship is explored quite a bit more in detail in this span of episodes, which I'm glad that they did not skimp out in terms of screen time, because I think it gets everyone fully on board with a relationship, though it may not last very long. Like, Act 1 is okay, but what happens is that fast pacing has a cascading effect that bleeds into the rest of the story. If we're looking at the quality of each act individually, then I feel like Act 2 is probably the best in my opinion. It feels the most emotional. It's where the characters get to have a lot more in-depth exploration. I, for one, was not expecting any of the stuff between Jinx, Vi, Isha, and what I'm going to call Vanderwyck. Although this does come at the expense of Jayce and Ekko's storyline, which was put completely on halt to explore this one. It's fun to see Vi and Jinx actually interact with each other for an extended period of time without the world just collapsing around them. And I liked the parallels between Jinx and Isha and Vi and Jinx being drawn and how their relationships mirror each other. I particularly like that Vander and his relationship to Silco is also further explored as well as what Vi and Jinx really mean to him. So what don't I like about Act 2? Well, I think Ambessa and Caitlyn's relationship was a little rushed. It's not as egregious as it could have been, but everything was technically set up, but not really explored to a degree that I would have liked. I also find it kind of weird that Caitlyn was kind of along for the ride when Singed enters the picture and starts hanging out with Team Dictator. Actually, while we're still on the problematic things that Caitlyn has been up to, Maddie as a rebound. If Maddie wasn't a Noxus spy, then, dating someone that you're like a direct superior of and seem to be a role model to is a bit weird. I might talk about this now instead of in Act 3, but Maddie's turn to Noxus was just bizarre as hell. As far as I could tell, there was no build up to this. Like, her subtly suggesting to Caitlyn to reinstate the Piltover Council and withdraw the forces from Zorn could maybe have been her fishing for information or seeing if Caitlyn was still loyal to Ambessa. I know it's a bit of a stretch, but like many of the things that happened towards the end of the season, it just feels underbaked. But like I said, everything to do with Vi and Jinx during this act is very good, but unfortunately it doesn't leave much room for the Arcane, what I'm calling the Arcane storyline that focuses around Jayce and Viktor. I don't even know where to begin with this one. Let's start with episode 7. I have nothing bad to say about this episode. It's pretty much perfect. Ekko gets a great deep dive into his character, which was sorely needed after not being part of the entire middle section of the season. Jayce doesn't get much to do character-wise, but I like that his part of the episode is setting the stakes for the finale. A song sung by Heimerdinger is not something that I knew I needed in my life, but I got it and I absolutely loved it. Kind of wild to set up an alternate universe where everyone's lives would have been better if Vi just fucking died. The problem with episode 7 has nothing to do with the episode itself. In fact, this feels like the best paced episode of the entire season because it feels like it's taking a breath. There's time to explore alternate universe Ekko and, alternate universe Powder. It's really nice to see characters spend time with each other and talk with each other. The problem with episode 7 is that it only leaves 2 episodes to wrap the rest of the story up during a time where it feels like every second counts. Episode 8, after the explosion where Jinx's foster daughter / younger sister Isha died, she apparently surrendered and went to jail. Really would have liked to have seen that scene, or really any scene where Jinx even mentions Isha from here on out. Does she feel guilt for what happened? Well, she probably does, but it's never stated. Obviously she's distraught, but does she blame herself? I think Arcane really drops the ball when it comes to Jinx and Vi's storyline during this episode and the last. It feels like during Act 2 that they were really building the blocks to recovering their relationship, only to just drop everything. Now I get that Isha's death throws a wrench into Jinx's mental state, but not between the sisters themselves. It feels like the story was heading to a point where Vi could make amends for the mistakes she made earlier in her life, and actually be there for her sister when it mattered the most. And we also get the resolution to Jinx and Caitlyn's story while we're in this prison. And this is actually a scene I really liked between the two of them, but again, it feels so rushed. There was so much more to say that could have been said between these two, but the problems here pale in comparison to the Jinx and Vi scene, which I don't even really want to talk about. What I will talk about is the scene where Jinx hallucinates Silco, where he tells her that the only way to break the cycle of violence is to walk away. And it's like, okay, we have a theme developing here, but where the fuck did this come from? It seems so antithetical to the story that was being told up to this point. Like, sure, this thing was kind of hinted at in the alternate universe where Vander and Silco managed to become friends by walking away from the violence, and like, cool. Sure, this idea is interesting and it works for Jinx's eventual ending, but where did this come from? The jump to get to this conclusion was a little jarring, because not only did it seem like Jinx and Vi have been doing nothing but trying to put their past behind them for the entirety of Act 2, but Jinx herself, before Isha died, had already somewhat done this. Like, she was in hiding for presumably months because she didn't want to be the hero and inspiration of Zorn. It just feels like a huge chunk of the story is missing. Throughout the entirety of Arcane, the growing unrest between the grimy undercity of Zorn and the prosperous rich city of Piltover has been one of the driving factors behind the entire plots of the show. In midway through Act 2, it is just kind of dropped. And it was especially one of the dividing factors between Jinx and Vi, in which they both stopped kind of caring about once Vanderwyk came into the picture. But also the stuff with Zorn just kind of stops mattering until the end where they show up to save the day. There is a point in the story where Piltover asks Nation of Zorn to help against the Noxus forces, and they do a symbolic lowering of the barricades indicating that things are changing, but only a handful of people come to help, and it's not much later where presumably Ekko, Jinx and Viktor are able to convince more of the Undercity's residents to help. And I say presumably because all of this is implied, which could have been fine if not for the fact that the last time we left off with these two cities, their relationship was in the worst state that it had ever been. Coming together to fight for the greater good could have been a great triumphant moment for the city of Zorn, where they aren't given independence but they earn it for themselves. But all of it is so criminally underbaked that the resolution to this story feels extremely underwhelming. But it also feels like if this part of the story got the resolution it needed, then it could have potentially fixed a lot of the finale's problems. Like, if the unrest between Piltover and Zorn was still hanging over Jinx and Vi, then I could see the theme of walking away being a little more prominent. Arcane Season 2 seems unable to juggle both major storylines at once. While Act 2 does the Jinx and Vi storyline extremely well, that is at the detriment to the Arcane storyline. While Act 3 does the Arcane storyline very well, it comes at the detriment to the Jinx and Vi story. A lot of shortcuts get taken, and while we can infer that Ekko convinced Jinx to join the fight, and then Jinx, Ekko and Viktor, who by the way, does not have a single line of dialogue for the entirety of Act 3, rallied the Undercity. And none of this felt very earned, because both the Undercity felt neglected plot-wise, and it felt like we were missing a lot of the emotionally resonant scenes to tie it all together. And I will say with Viktor, she isn't like a main character, but she's been around since the start. And the last time we saw her, she was unable to convince people of the Undercity to join her, so how did she eventually do that and become a figurehead for, you know what, I'm not even going to bother. It's underbaked. I mean, when you think about the story beats that happen, it can all make sense if you can connect all the dots in your head. And for the most part, you can do this for a lot of the things that happen, but that's not satisfying to watch. And it's things like there were no repercussions for Caitlyn using the Grey against Zorn, which a character said that was something that Piltover promised to never use again. Or even when Caitlyn went full dictator mode on Zorn. Almost all of this can be reasoned away, and it feels like none of those things were ever really explored or got a satisfying resolution. There are so many of these moments where you have to think about how did we end up here and how did we end up there. And it left me kind of unable to enjoy quite a few of the things happening during the finale. But it's not that I didn't know why things were happening, it's just that I didn't feel like the things happening were being earned. You know, the show just starts flying past what should be thematically relevant moments that would enrich the story being told. Look, because this feels like we're going into a largely negative direction, I'm just going to take a break for a moment and talk about what I liked going into the finale of this show. The Jayce and Viktor stuff felt like it was very well done. I really enjoyed this whole story arc, even though I felt a bit understated in the first 2 acts. They did a really good job of setting the stakes and the character motivations. I personally liked the resolution to their story, although I feel like it does leave quite a few questions unanswered. Similar to Mel and Mbessa's storyline, I really liked the Black Rose stuff. The trippy magic and things that were happening there were really cool, although I am a bit unsure why Mel sent Mbessa to the Black Rose only to save her, but then Mbessa died anyway. This whole side of the story did feel less like that there were questions unanswered and more that had happened wasn't really explained properly, but nonetheless I did enjoy it. But because Mel was pretty much the only character involved in a big chunk of the Black Rose plot, it mostly took place in a largely removed setting. It meant that a significant time had to be spent explaining this one thing for this one character. But like I've been saying for the entirety of the video, everything comes back to pacing. So even while I liked the resolution between Mel, Caitlyn, and Mbessa, it could have used some more groundwork. But the problem is we didn't have time for more groundwork. And you know, while I liked Jayce and Viktor's ending, I definitely think that could have also used some more setting up, especially with the growing divide and eventual fallout between the 2 of the characters. You know, probably around the time Viktor decides to abandon Jayce and become underground Jesus. Going into the end of Act 3, a lot of other stuff happens, like Caitlyn and Vi banged. That happened. Look, Caitlyn and Vi as a couple work. I think they did more than enough to make it believable. But again, I would have liked to have seen that relationship fleshed out just a little bit more. And they probably should have moved that scene to a different spot in the story, although there isn't really much room for it anywhere else. It is a bit weird that after Jinx escaped, who seemed way more visually unwell than usual, Vi just decided to bang her girlfriend instead of going after her. And I'm not saying that Vi should have known that Jinx was going to go, blow herself up, but it was a strange decision for this to happen right at this moment. Now, here's a question. Did Ekko tell Jinx about his alternate universe experiences? Because that also probably could have helped sell the walking away theme that the show was starting to manifest. Also, I would have liked to have known what Ekko would have said to Jinx to convince her to come back from the brink. Because what we got, it wasn't enough. We're in the final episode and this isn't the time to be cutting away from character resolution, especially when they directly tie into their endings. Alright, so endings and character resolution. Like I said, I don't actually mind the ending to this show, with the exception of 3 characters, and you can probably guess by now, because at the height of the Arcane storyline in the final act, Jinx, Vi, and Vanderwick's story takes a back seat. And I guess it was kind of expected due to the whole world-ending apocalypse event that was going on, but that's fine. It's expected as long as one of the characters don't get put in a situation where they're forced into making a sacrifice due to an infuriatingly cheap setup. Oh, they did that? Now, I'm sure if you were paying attention, it is implied, although not explicitly stated, that Jinx did survive this sacrifice. First off is the very obvious hint that Caitlyn looking through her records and zooming in on the blueprints of the air vents. Second is the less obvious but more evident few frames of pink that seem to zoom away from the explosion, suggesting that Jinx used her shimmer speed to escape. On top of that flashback scene where it shows Vander staring at the girls when they were kids from his point of view, indicating that he probably let her go. And the last hint is the last frame of the show, which shows a seemingly innocuous airship flying out to the horizon, which Jinx, or Powder, once suggested that she wanted to ride on one day, which is cut off by a Jinx flash. So why do I hate this? I mean, it's pretty much confirmed that Jinx lived, and I'm okay with that. Vi seemed to get a happy ending, and Vanderwick probably isn't dead, but nothing is really shown. And that's the real problem. Every major plot point is just left open-ended. What happened to Jayce and Viktor? Some weird magic shit. Or they disappeared, or died, or they're traveling through timelines to fix their mistakes. I don't know. Piltover and Zorn have made some strides towards change, but not much seems conclusive due to the looks the council were giving Savika. Mel doesn't get any closure with Jayce, which is pretty wild considering how close they were in the first season. I missed this the first time, but apparently Mel leaves for Noxus. Maybe I missed it because I was in shock because Jinx gets no real resolutions with anyone. Everyone just thinks she's dead. And if she is indeed on that airship, where is she going? I think it was just one too many non-resolutions that ended up breaking me. We have 2 options. 1, Jinx sacrificed herself in a pointlessly cheap conclusion. Second, and the most likely, is that she survived and decided to abandon everyone and everything to start over, in turn leaving Vi, Ekko, and Savika behind who still cared for her. What a horrible choose-your-own adventure. Vanderwick, who I've been refusing to call Warwick because, I mean, look at him. Is he dead? Does he eventually turn into what we know him as? I guess the same could be said for Viktor, who doesn't really turn into his in-game counterpart, but at least I feel like Viktor had a more realised character resolution, and it also seems like he's the character in-game who's going to be retconned and changed to be more like his Arcane counterpart. Like, Vanderwick may have let Jinx go in the end. As I said, the flashback definitely hints that this happened, but that also goes directly against a scene earlier where we see his memories visually get burned away, signifying to us, the audience, that he is gone for good. Did his memories return back to him because Viktor's influence was gone? Again, it's all implied or suggested, and God, I'm so tired. Vi, the final piece of the puzzle, I don't hate her ending as much as the other two. For one, because she gets kind of an ending that's a bit more conclusive than the others. I don't like that her stupidity is a catalyst for the sequence of events that leads to Jinx's sacrifice. And I'm just kind of really disappointed that after everything they've been through, like, this was the ending, the conclusion that they had built to. So, I don't like armchair screenwriting. I don't like it when people say, oh, I could have written Game of Thrones better or something like that. I know I couldn't write something like Arcane, even though I feel like the show fumbled the ending, especially when it came to a lot of the character resolutions or lack thereof. I can't deny the fact that there was so much good that came out of this show. Seeing my favourite video game character of all time brought to life, and being written in a way that not only did justice to her character, but expanded on her personality, gave her an origin story that was not only fitting, but absolutely fucking heartbreaking. I never in my life thought I would give a shit about the dynamic between two characters like Jayce or Viktor, but here we are. Often, people don't realise that if you criticise something, that doesn't always mean you don't like it. I love this TV show, but if you couldn't tell by now, I disliked the ending to Jinx's story, if that really is the end. I couldn't help thinking to myself, in another universe, where I was somehow on the Arcane writing team, how would I have ended Jinx's story? How would I have changed the ending to Arcane? First off, I think we need to make Vi and Jinx more integral to the end game of the Arcane storyline. This means moving the fight with Vanderwick closer to the main Jayce and Viktor stuff. We can still have a self-sacrifice moment for Jinx if we really want, but we're taking out the fake-out death completely. When Viktor starts zombifying like everybody in the world, Jinx gets herself caught to buy time for Vi, so maybe she can help Ekko so he can do his thing. Then the rest can play out as is, with the exception that Vanderwick doesn't wake up after it's all done. Post-battle sometime, Jinx at one point sees Vi with Caitlyn and how happy her sister is, but Vi once again offers to go away with Jinx like the end of the first season, which is, you know, a core character trait of Vi is that she just doesn't want to let Jinx go. But Jinx declines, and this time actually talks to her fucking sister, because she can see what Caitlyn means to Vi, and vice versa. And Jinx knows that she wouldn't be able to stay during her whole being a wanted terrorist thing, as well as, you know, a symbol of Dawn's continued rebellion. And keeping with the bittersweet ending, Jinx and Vi can finally talk without the world just crumbling around them. They can fully reconcile, but they also can't be together. But now without the emotionally manipulating fake-out death that they put in. And I feel like it keeps with the theme of Jinx walking away from everything, just in a bit more of a literal way, and in my opinion, a bit more emotionally resonant, especially if there was some good dialogue and performances behind like a scene like that. Same with Ekko, he'd want to go with Jinx, but he also has a duty to the Firelights and his community of people, you know, which was one of his driving motivations throughout the season. Like, that was why he wanted to come back to original timeline. And that also means that we can keep that scene with him sitting alone at the end. It would just have a slightly different context. And all of this could also partially serve as an actual epilogue, which I feel like this show really needed. And it doesn't leave Vi thinking that her poor fucking sister is dead, heaping another load of trauma onto a human being that doesn't deserve it. I've said it a million times, but we can infer how things will go on from the montage. But in the end, it just leaves things way too ambiguous to feel satisfying. But that's how it felt for me. And I've already told you that this character means a lot to me, and maybe because of that, maybe anything less than a perfect ending in my mind was always going to be a letdown. In the end, that wasn't the ending we were given, and we're just kind of left to speculate a lot of details. Did Caitlyn tell Vi that Jinx may be alive after she figured that out? Where is Jinx even going? We don't really know what she wants as a person other than a clear slate. And I don't know if I've ever been so conflicted over an ending. And it's not that I hate what happened, although I don't really like fake out deaths, but it's kind of just how we got there, and it feels messy, and it feels like all this time building up in Act 2 that none of it mattered. Now, I have a few theories as to what happens now that Arcane is over, and hopefully this video doesn't age like milk left in the sun, but let's just go for it. Now, I think that because the show is called Arcane and the storyline is centered around the Arcane event, and now everything to do with the anomaly is wrapped up, whatever the next show will be based around one major event that happens. Most likely something to do with Noxus and probably either Ionia or Demacia, if we're going to keep with like the two regions at once kind of way of storytelling. Based on the crow at the end, which is a hint towards Swain, and the mostly unresolved Black Rose plot, then Noxus is definitely next. And I would say that a handful of characters would return from Arcane to help narratively bridge the gaps while pushing the world's lore forward. Mel being the most likely to continue on, but I would imagine that there is an intent to continue moving the Runeterran story forward from this point. Potentially working towards, other world-ending threats such as the Void or the Watchers. Hopefully not the Shadow Isles again. I mean, that could be alright, but I'm still not over the last time that they tried that. And obviously Riot have said that there are more shows to come, and there's already one that has been in development for a year, but again, we're just kind of left to speculate what that's going to be. Is the reason that a lot of characters have ambiguous endings because we're going to see them again? Or is this it? I'm conflicted. On one hand, I would love to see what Jinx would go and do off, especially considering she is a character at this point seemed so confined and so integral to the Piltover and Zorn story that it'd be interesting to see what she would do outside of that bubble. As much as I love this character, I don't really want this to become the Jinx show. Actually, you know what? I kind of do. That's a lie. But I don't know if I should be getting my hopes up that maybe Jinx will go to Demacia and make #LightCannon real. I hate that I know what this is, but I also kind of dig the ship. Or maybe she will go to Noxus and come across and adopt another child in need in the likes of someone like Annie. Or should I just come to terms with this being it, and that I just need to live with the fact that I just didn't really like the ending of her story? I mean, again, it is implied through Caitlyn's voiceover during the epilogue scenes that there are more stories to tell, but once again, that could mean anything. It's inconclusive, and I'm just left with this empty feeling. Pacing got away from Arcane Season 2. Themes didn't feel like they were properly set up. Characters felt like their resolutions were left too ambiguous or didn't have enough time to reach their conclusions naturally. Major plotlines and characters felt like they were neglected for extended periods of time. And it just feels like if we had maybe a minimum of 3 more episodes that things could have been fixed. I could come to terms with Jinx's ending a bit easier if I felt like that was where her story was building to and not something that felt like it was introduced at the 11th hour. Look, knowing my luck, as soon as I publish this video, then I will probably get an answer that invalidates everything that I said or theorized. But I feel so conflicted. And I think part of the reason I made this video at all is just to kind of cope with how I feel about Arcane's second season and how it ended, and how it didn't feel like as good as the first. And it's not bad, I just feel like confining the show to 9 episodes was a mistake. People are saying that this should have been 3 seasons to really flesh out the story, and I would almost agree if not for the fact that each season had 3-year gaps between them, and I don't think I would have liked to have waited another 3 years if we got the same ending that we did, regardless of if it was more fleshed out or not. This video was born out of post-show depression, multiplied by my love for the characters, and honestly, this script has actually been very therapeutic to write, and I kind of get that if I knew exactly what was coming in terms of how the universe was going to build out from here on out, it would spoil things a bit. There's a fine line between open-ended and just plain unsatisfying, and where that line sits will be different for everyone. Like, if you enjoyed season 2 of Arcane and how it ended, then I wouldn't hold that against you, and same if you disliked it completely due to the pacing. Your enjoyment is left up to your interpretation. Before I go, I just want to thank you all for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, then please leave it a like. I would say that if you're new, then please consider subscribing, but an emotional Arcane deep dive isn't my usual MO. I normally review games and sometimes TV shows, but sometimes I do something weird and stupid like this. I'd like to think that this video has more of a point to it rather than ranting about a TV show's pacing and my disliking to the payoff of a few major story beats. Hang on a second. What the fuck happened to Heimerdinger?